The Old West was rough, unpredictable, and always armed. Every corner of that world had its own kind of danger, and people carried whatever gave them an edge. Some weapons became legends, while others stayed in the shadows, used by a few, remembered by even fewer. Number 1. The duckfoot pistol. The name sounds like a joke until you see one up close. Instead of a single barrel, the muzzle flares into 3 or 4 short barrels that point in slightly different directions, which is where the duck's foot idea comes from. The whole point was simple. In a tight room full of angry people, you wanted to hit more than one target with a single pull of the trigger. Most examples were flintlock, or later percussion cap builds with a single lock that touched off several charges at once. A few specialty versions let you fire barrels in sequence, but the classic pattern was a one-and-done blast. Effective range was short. Think across a table or a doorway, not across a street. The projectiles were round pistol balls in common calibers of the day, and they spread because the barrels were angled, not because it worked like a shotgun. That spread helped a nervous shooter who did not have time to aim. Reloading was slow and messy, which is why the duckfoot lived in moments, not long fights. You see it first in naval and guard use, where a captain or jailer might face a crowd at arm's length. In the American Old West, it was never a cowboy's daily carry, but odd pieces did make their way west through surplus traders and private sales. A sheriff minding a cramped jail, a Wells Fargo agent riding coach through rough towns, or a saloon owner who expected brawls might stash one behind the bar as a last resort. Outlaws did not favor it because it hid poorly and was heavy. Lawmen liked that a single blast could shock a room into silence. The trade-off was obvious. If the first volley failed, you were left waving a metal club while the other guy still had rounds. Compared to a pepper box, the duckfoot promised area denial rather than sustained fire. Compared to a sawed-off shotgun, it was more compact and less lethal at distance, which mattered indoors where ricochets were a real risk. Its real value was psychological. The shape alone warned a crowd that the next bad decision could hit 3 people at once. That threat gave one person, against many, a few precious seconds to take control, which is exactly what a lawman in a rough western town needed. Number 2. The palm pistol. Imagine a pocket watch that bites back when you squeeze it. That is the palm pistol, born in France in the early 1880s and later sold in the United States under the name the Protector. The inventor shaped the gun as a metal disc that fit against the palm, with a short barrel peeking out between the fingers. You gripped a springy lever, and the gun fired a small cartridge. Inside, a rotating turret carried multiple rounds, so each squeeze advanced the next chamber without any visible hammer or trigger to catch on clothing. Most American examples used the 32 extra short rimfire cartridge, which kept recoil low and the mechanism compact. Capacity on common models was 7 shots, which was a big deal for a handgun that hid in a vest pocket. The palm pistol was made for crowded rooms and close arguments. At 2 or 3 paces, it could punch through a coat and stop a fight. Across a saloon, it lost steam fast. That trade-off was the whole point. It gave a nervous traveler, or a city detective, a fast first answer in places where drawing a full-size revolver would be slow or obvious. The disc shape also spread the force across the hand, which made it easier for small or injured shooters to control. Loading took patience. You opened the side plate, slipped short cartridges into the star-shaped cylinder, closed it up, and relied on the simple squeeze action to do the rest. Owners liked the safety catch and the way the muzzle naturally pointed where the fist pointed. Gunsmiths liked the clean double action that kept grit out of the works. The palm pistol arrived late in the frontier years, but it captured the mood of that era. People wanted a last-chance tool that could hide in plain sight and tip a bad situation their way. It was not a dueling piece. It was a quiet insurance policy for card tables, train cars, hotel lobbies, and dark streets where looking unarmed could be the safest choice. Number 3. The volcanic repeating pistol. Picture a sleek little lever gun, shrunk into a handgun, with a tube under the barrel that you filled from the front. That is the volcanic. You worked the lever like a tiny rifle, which scooped a fresh round from the magazine and sealed the action. The clever part was the ammunition. Instead of using a separate brass case, the Volcanic fired rocket bull cartridges, where the powder and primer were tucked inside a hollow bullet. On paper, that made the gun compact and fast to reload. In real life, it created a power problem, because there was only so much powder you could stuff into that little cavity. Muzzle energy was closer to a hot 22 than a serious fighting round, which meant the pistol felt futuristic but hit like a lightweight. Calibers were 31 and 41, with pocket, target, and navy sizes, and capacities ran from 6 to 10 shots depending on barrel length. For the 1850s, that was wild. A gambler or guard could fire a string without reloading, while a single-shot pistol owner was still capping the next charge. The weak cartridge and the early mechanism held it back. Fouling built up. Feeding could be picky. If you were counting on it to stop a charging man, you needed placement more than luck. Still, the design mattered. Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson pushed this system hard, then folded it into a new company with investors like Oliver Winchester. When Volcanic struggled, Winchester took the assets to New Haven and put Benjamin Tyler Henry on the problem. He kept the lever and the tubular magazine, but switched to a stronger rimfire cartridge. That jump gave us the Henry rifle, and then the Winchesters that defined Western gun lore. So the Volcanic sits in that interesting place. As a sidearm, it was a stylish compromise. As a stepping stone, it was gold, because it proved the idea of a repeating firearm. You could run fast and keep fed from a tube under the barrel, which is exactly what changed frontier fights a few years later. Number 4. The Apache revolver. The Apache is one of those strangest hybrids you can imagine, and it looks like someone tried to combine a knuckle duster, a dagger, and a tiny revolver into a single street-ready tool. It was designed in Belgium in the later 19th century, and is most often tied to Liège makers and the name Louis d'Aulne, though several shops in France and Belgium built variations. When closed, it sat in the palm like a heavy trinket or a folded tool, and when opened, the finger holes became a knuckle duster. A small multi-shot cylinder presented a handful of pinfire or rimfire chambers, and a short blade folded out to finish the set. Mechanical simplicity was part of its appeal. Most examples used a pinfire, or very small rimfire cylinder, and a compact double action, so you could strike with the knuckles, stab with the blade, or fire a close-range shot without changing grip. The trade-offs are obvious. With no proper barrel or sights, the ballistic performance was poor beyond point blank, and the small calibers meant stopping power was limited. That made the Apache ideal for muggings, quick self-defense, and the sort of criminal tradecraft that thrived in cramped city streets rather than open prairie firefights. The weapon became associated with the Parisian gangs called Les Apaches around the turn of the century, which is how the nickname stuck even though the design predated the gang by a decade or more. Law enforcement and collectors noticed the pattern quickly, because the device solved a narrow problem very well. It was concealable, brutal in close quarters, and theatrical enough to intimidate. Export and use in the American West were marginal at best. A few examples traveled with immigrants, or appeared in curios and private sales, but the Apache never became a common frontier sidearm. What it does show is how inventors pushed combination and concealment into extreme forms when social life moved into cramped urban alleys and when a hand tool needed to be ready for any kind of violence. Number 5. The Pepperbox revolver. The Pepperbox looks like someone glued a handful of short barrels together and called it a handgun. It predates the classic single-barrel revolver, and it solved a simple problem for ordinary people. Instead of loading and capping a single chamber over and over, you had several ready-to-fire barrels in one unit, so you could put multiple shots downrange without fiddling with caps between each round. That made it a favorite for travelers, teamsters, and gamblers who wanted a compact, high-capacity backup on roads and in crowded places. Most pepperboxes were small-bore by modern standards, usually in the 28 to a 36 range, though larger dragoon-style examples existed for mounted use. Mechanically, you will see two basic families. Some pepperboxes rotate the barrel cluster to bring the next tube in line with the hammer. Others leave the barrels fixed and rotate the firing pin or the hammer to strike successive chambers. Both approaches work, but both also have trade-offs. The design keeps a lot of firepower in a single hand, yet it can be heavy at the muzzle and awkward to point at distance. Accuracy falls off quickly beyond point blank, and early percussion models suffered from fouling and occasional chain fire risks. Still, for close work on dusty roads and in saloons, a pepperbox was often more useful than a single-shot pistol. It was inexpensive compared with early Colts and offered a psychological edge because multiple shots were visible at once. The pepperbox also mattered as a technological bridge. Makers like Allen and Thurber refined indexing and locking systems that helped later repeaters become safer and more reliable. By the 1850s, the classic Colt revolver and the new metallic cartridge designs eclipsed pepperboxes. But in the chaotic years of westward migration, the pepperbox was a real, practical choice for people who needed quick answers and did not want to wait on a reload. Number 6. The Whitworth Rifle. This rifle wasn't something you'd see slung over a cowboy's shoulder on a dusty trail. It was a precision weapon, built for accuracy in an age when most rifles were lucky to hit a man at a few hundred yards. The Whitworth rifle was created by Sir Joseph Whitworth in England around the late 1850s, and it was completely different from what shooters were used to. Instead of the normal round barrel, it had a hexagonal one. The bullet wasn't round either. It was shaped to fit perfectly inside that hex pattern. That gave the bullet a tight, consistent spin, which made it incredibly stable in flight. In tests, it easily outperformed the Enfield rifle that most soldiers used, grouping shots at distances that seemed impossible for the time. What really set the Whitworth apart was its range and precision. It could hit a target at 800 or even 1,000 yards, which was almost unheard of in the mid-19th century. That's why it caught the attention of military leaders and sharpshooters. During the American Civil War, a few of these rifles ended up in the hands of Confederate marksmen. They used them with deadly effect, especially when fitted with an early telescopic sight. There's a famous story about Union General John Sedgwick being shot by a Confederate sniper using a Whitworth rifle from an enormous distance. That story, whether every detail is true or not, helped cement its reputation as one of the first true sniper rifles in history. But the rifle wasn't perfect. It was expensive to make, and the ammunition was complex. The hexagonal bullets had to be carefully cast, and the rifle fouled up faster than standard muskets because of the tight tolerances in the barrel. It was also slow to reload, since it was still a muzzle loader. Those drawbacks made it impractical for regular soldiers, or for anyone on the frontier who needed a gun that could handle dirt, weather, and fast reloading. Still, the Whitworth represented something new accuracy as a science. It showed that with the right engineering, even black powder guns could deliver modern-level precision. Some of these rifles made their way west after the war, often carried by long-range shooters or wealthy hunters who wanted the best gear money could buy. They weren't common, but people who owned one respected it deeply. It wasn't about volume of fire. It was about making every shot count. And in the wide-open landscapes of the Old West, where distances stretched farther than a man could walk in a day, that kind of precision was something special. Number 7. The harmonica gun. This weapon got its name because the magazine looked like a small harmonica that slid through the side of the gun. It wasn't designed to play music, but it definitely made noise. Instead of using a rotating cylinder like a revolver, the harmonica gun used a long rectangular metal bar with several chambers drilled through it. Each chamber held powder, a bullet, and a primer. After firing one shot, the shooter would slide the bar sideways to align the next chamber with the barrel. It was a simple idea, but it gave the user multiple shots at a time, when most guns still had to be reloaded after every shot. The design first appeared around the 1840s, with early versions made by inventive gunsmiths who were experimenting with repeating mechanisms. One of the most notable names connected to it was Jonathan Browning, the father of John Moses Browning, who later became one of the greatest firearm designers in history. Jonathan's versions were well built and practical for the period. He made them for settlers and travelers who were moving west and needed something with more firepower than a single-shot musket. His rifles could hold 5 to 15 rounds, which was impressive for the time. The system had strengths and weaknesses. It was reliable and could be reloaded faster than many early repeaters. But the design also made the gun heavy and unbalanced because the long metal magazine stuck out to one side. The shooter had to move it manually after each shot, which slowed things down in a fight. Still, it was a big step forward in firearm innovation. Some later models, especially French-made versions by Alphonse Jarre in the 1860s, improved the concept by using self-contained cartridges instead of loose powder and ball. These European models were smaller, often built as pistols, and were surprisingly compact. They found limited use among lawmen, bodyguards, and people who wanted a strange but reliable multi-shot weapon. Despite its clever engineering, the harmonica gun never became mainstream because revolvers and lever-action rifles quickly became more practical. A Colt or a Winchester was easier to carry, balance, and reload under pressure. Still, the harmonica gun deserves attention because it represents an important bridge between the single-shot era and the true repeaters that dominated the Old West. It was an experiment in giving ordinary people more control in a dangerous world. For a short time, it actually worked, and that's what makes it such an interesting piece of Old West history. Number 8. The cane gun. The cane gun was one of the most unusual weapons to come out of the 19th century. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary walking stick, something a gentleman or traveler might carry on a long journey. But inside the hollow shaft was a hidden barrel and a small firing mechanism. Most examples could fire only one shot, usually in .22 or .32 caliber, and they were designed for close-range self-defense. The purpose was simple: to give someone a way to protect themselves without openly carrying a gun. During the later years of the Old West, carrying weapons in towns was often restricted. Lawmen didn't want drunks or hotheads flashing pistols in saloons, so people began looking for concealed options. The cane gun solved that problem. You could walk around fully armed, and no one would ever suspect it. The best-known versions were made by Remington in the late 1860s and 1870s. These canes had sleek metal or wooden bodies with a curved handle that served as the hammer. To fire, the user pulled back the handle to cock it, then pressed a small hidden trigger near the top. Some versions even had safety mechanisms so they wouldn't go off accidentally. Reloading was slow though. You had to unscrew the handle, slide in a cartridge, and put it all back together again. That made it a one-shot weapon meant for emergencies, not prolonged fights. Still, it gave its owner a serious advantage in a sudden confrontation. The cane gun wasn't something cowboys used on the trail or outlaws carried into shootouts. It was more of a city weapon. Wealthy businessmen, gamblers, detectives, and older sheriffs who wanted protection without attracting attention were the usual buyers. It was also popular among travelers moving through rough territory, especially on trains where robberies were common. Beyond the United States, European gunsmiths built similar weapons. In Britain, they made air-powered canes for hunting small animals. Others were built as novelty pieces for collectors or officers who wanted a stylish accessory that could still fire a bullet. Despite its clever design, the cane gun had clear limits. It wasn't powerful, and it wasn't fast. It worked only at very short distance, and if the first shot failed, there was no quick second chance. Still, the idea captured the imagination of the era. It was a mix of innovation and subtlety, a weapon that looked polite but carried real danger. In a time when appearances mattered and personal safety was never guaranteed, the cane gun fit perfectly. It represented the cautious mindset of people in the Old West who knew that even a calm street could turn violent without warning.